Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're excited for this panel. This is an amazing group of composers. I'll start by just introducing everyone. Austin Wintory, Stephen Barton, Gordy Haab, Stephanie Ikonomu, and Nainita Desai. Thank you for being here. And Steve Schnurr, the president of EA Music, couldn't be here, but he gave us a lovely video that we can watch to start.
I'm Steve Schnurr. There's no such thing as a video game composer. And why is that? Well, first of all, a smart composer should never restrict themselves to one medium. It makes practical sense for a composer to never limit themselves or their talents. Second is the creative opportunities. On a technological and artistic level, the frontiers of interactive media challenge the composer's skill and imagination, but I'm admittedly biased there. Finally, and perhaps most important is this: whether the audience is seated in a theater or on a couch, the composer's responsibility remains the same, and that's to write themes, melodies, and cues to make the audience feel a more powerful emotional connection to the material. A great composer is a great composer, period. And you're about to hear from several of them right now. So thank you for coming today. Enjoy the panel, and I can't wait to see you next year.
So I think we're going to start with the question, is Steve right? Is there no such thing as a video game composer? And Austin, maybe we can start with you and then go down.
I guess he's not here to defend himself, so we can really get dirty. I mean, I've always rejected the label. I've always just liked thinking of myself as a composer. But, you know, yesterday morning I sat on this couch and had a wonderful conversation with Bobby Borislav Slavov, who said he has no interest in working in anything other than games because he is extremely passionate about embedding with teams, getting to know the inner workings of a game. You know, he's a staff member of Larian Studios, working on Baldur's Gate 3, for example, for 6 years. And that lets you do certain things that you can't do as a freelance composer who drifts around from one place to another. So there is a selling point to it. Now, that said, it's not enough to convince me, because I go, I don't want a staff job anywhere. I like to be able to write music for this and then do a TV show and then do a movie and then back to games and that sort of thing. So it's like Steve's right for Austin, but not necessarily globally. Period.
Is Steve right for Steven?
That's a really good question. I mean, I suppose you could take it even further, and you could even be, now we're getting to the point of, like, you could say, is there such a thing as a video game? And obviously there largely still is. That is largely true. We can sort of delineate the mediums, but I think we're rapidly getting to the point where, you know, you only have to look at particularly the encroachment, wonderful encroachment now of games into TV and film for years, and people have been asking for, like, where's the TV version of X game? Where's the film version of this game? I think we're probably getting to a point where you're going to start to have things that are designed for all mediums, and at that point we're sort of like, well, you know, are we really delineating it in that sense? So it's for me, it's I definitely want to be able to work in you know, film and TV and video games. I mean, I would say I'm quite similar to Bobby in the sense I'm like drawn to games because of the time factor, you know, and still with film, although it's improving a little bit, actually, funny enough, even streaming may fix this. But this the whole thing of like getting called and being like, yeah, you have to, you know, you've got to write 80 minutes of music and you've got 3 weeks to do it. And like, that's not fun. That's not that entertaining. I mean, you can do it, sure, and kill yourself, or, you know, a week to do a TV episode, but it's not really conducive to quality. So I think that's why games have become this really interesting medium with really interesting music being created, because we have the time to actually play and, you know, iterate and have ideas and be okay with throwing something out. So yeah, I would 1,000% agree, and maybe even go further.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with Steve. Steve is a good friend of mine, and we've been talking about this exact subject for years. And I mean, the truth is, I mean, like Austin was saying, I mean, there's certain people who are very passionate about games. I'm passionate about games. I'm also passionate about film. But my first passion, my first true love is music. So that's what I'm drawn to is using my love for music to enhance games or film or television or whatever the next generation of media will be. Because truthfully, when I started out, I had this notion, 20 X years ago, when I was at USC scoring department studying, and I just wanted to only do specifically film, but even more sort of tuned in horror films. I loved the genre. I felt that my music kind of served that genre really well. I only wanted to do that, and I ended up sort of pigeonholing myself in a way. The industry is very good at pigeonholing, so I'd rather them do it than sort of limit myself. And fast forward a couple years, I had a friend that was producing a video game. He was working at LucasArts at the time. And he asked me if I'd ever had an interest in scoring a video game, and it had never even crossed my mind that they would hire a composer to write music. And I said, yeah, sure, it sounds like a lot of fun, I'll try it. And my career just took off from there in games, and it's like maybe 75, 80% of my career for the past decade and a half or more has been in games, and I absolutely love it. And it's just proof that, I had put limits on myself, but the industry changes, media changes, what people love is going to always evolve. So I would prefer to not put limits on myself. So I absolutely agree with Steve on this.
We're getting to the end of the train, and I fear I have nothing additive to say. I agree with Steve. I like what Austin said. Like what Steve said is how I feel for myself. But I do agree that there are many composers who have been in the game space for so long and have so much, such a handle on what it takes to create music and sound design and implement music in games, that there's maybe a sense of being protective over the fact that like this is what a game composer means to me. For me personally, I have mostly done film and television. I'm very, very new to the game space, relatively speaking to everybody else sitting up here with me, and probably a lot of you in the audience as well. So for me, I loved stepping into that world because it excited a different part of my imagination. It challenged my process, just technically and creatively. And I love being able to have a well-rounded career where I can explore all of those spaces, because I feel like after stepping into games, now how I approach my film and TV work is influenced by that, and vice versa, right? So like coming from that, I feel like, my game music was defined by sort of some of the things that I have written for film and TV, just like process-wise, like sitting down and how I create themes and all of those things. But it's a different, it's nice to be able to do all of them. And I hope my career looks like that, where I can kind of always have a balance of all of those things. That feels cool to me, but for others, like just working in games is amazing as well. So Steve is always right, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Please forgive me, my voice has gone down an octave because I've got a bit of a throat infection, so forgive me if I have to walk away in a coughing fit. But so I'll be a bit minimalist with my words. But I don't believe in boxes. I've never believed in being put into a box. And I love, what you were saying about pigeonholing and all of that. And so I feel a little bit like Stephanie, I feel a bit of an imposter coming new to games, because my career started in video games, and then I took a bit of a break for 20 years and worked in film and television. And now I've come back into the games world arena in the last 3-4 years. And it's fascinating to see how all the forces have converged, and there's so much synchronicity and symbiosis between all these different medias. There are technical constraints. Actually, maybe constraints is the wrong word, but technical challenges, and that's the beauty of working in games, which I've been embracing over the last couple of years with my foray into games. So I think there's so much give and take going from one area to the other, and this new word being bandied around about 360 interactive entertainment, and I've had the privilege of working on sort of hybrid forms of film and video games coming together to create new forms of entertainment, and I think that's a very, very exciting space. So creatively, the world is open, with the constraints of the streamers and the tight schedules and the budgets and so on, as you were saying about having to write, for 100 minutes of music in 3 weeks or whatever, and my personal experience of games, having to write 90 minutes of music over a year and a half or something, and the joy of, and the freedom and being part of a team, working with a development team embedded into the DNA of, and being part of the fabric of creating something, a story that's so special, I think is just amazing. Whereas the aesthetics of working in film and TV are slightly different, and it's changed a lot over the years. So I think there's a happy medium to be found between all of that. And I think as composers, we are just composers, and we're storytellers ultimately, no matter what medium we're working in.
Well, what Nainita and Gordy both said about the entertainment industry wanting to pigeonhole people. Does anybody else want to speak about that? Have you found that to be true?
Yeah. 1,000%. I mean, it's one of those ones where, generally speaking, you walk into a meeting and it's because if you're one of those, you do something and everyone's like, I mean, I did one thing a number of years ago and I've been asked to repeat it basically with Apex Legends, where, I had one little hook, and that they were the number of times with the notes you'd get the briefing for what they were looking for, and especially sometimes if we're doing demos and they'd be like, we'd like one of those, please. I remember chatting with Tom Newman about this one time, a long time ago, and he was like, the number of times people said like, hey, we'd like American Beauty. Like, well, I'm sure you would like American Beauty. It was an amazing score. But that's, and I mean, interestingly with games, we're not quite as plagued with temp tracks in the sense that actually it's become, because games have become so big, it's quite risky to put a temp track into, you can accidentally ship a temp track if you don't label, if the developer puts in a piece of music and doesn't label it correctly, that can accidentally ship, and there's all sorts of legal problems then. But so often we don't get the same sort of like, oh, here's something we really like that, and gradually you find yourself inching towards it. And we've all certainly been there, but I think there's a really nice space with games where you actually have the time to sit down and be okay with throwing things out, and that's, I think, the big difference is, like, with film we tend to try and fix something when it's wrong. We'll be like, here's your fixes, you get your 9th round of fixes and you're like, well, maybe the first cue was probably wrong. So that's, I think, the big difference is, I think we're okay with putting things on the cutting room floor, and that's been my experience anyway. But absolutely, the pigeonholing thing is 1,000% the case. But hopefully, I think that's something we all try and fight against, because I mean, ultimately, if you do one thing that's really successful, you don't want to just spend the rest of your life doing 90 more of those. I mean, unless that's what you want to do, in which case, great, that's cool.
One of my favorite pigeonholing. I have two very short, actually good sort of apropos stories from colleagues of ours. The on the one side, I did a panel once with Tyler Bates, and someone asked in the audience, how do you avoid being pigeonholed? And he said, why would you avoid being pigeonholed? And it's the only time I've ever heard anybody come hard on the pro pigeonholing side, because he said, if you can be the one person everyone thinks of whenever they want to make that thing, you have an endless stream of work in a world where work is scarce. So he said, the key is, if you want to branch out, the director relationships you form under the umbrella of your pigeonholing will then take you other places. And in his case, at the time he developed this relationship with James Gunn that took him into the world of doing the Guardians of the Galaxy, but he was one of the horror guys and kind of thriller guys. And I remember thinking, this was like 15 years ago, and I think about that all the time. It was a really actually kind of profound statement. And even though my instinct is very much also like, like Nainita, I don't like boxes. I want to try a thing that I've never done, or my little shtick is, at the end of a project, can I look back and go, I didn't think I could do that. That's always the goal, and obviously pigeonholing is the opposite of that. I know I've done this before, but the other one I really love that's in a similar vein is a colleague and mutual friend of a lot of ours, is a guy named Jason Graves. And when the game Dead Space came out 12, 14, something like that years ago, it was sort of the horror game to end all horror games. And he wrote truly one of the most magnificent game scores of all time. I mean, it was just so sophisticated. And his name is Graves, for God's sake. He became the horror game composer. And so flash forward a few years later, however many, 10 plus years later, there's this studio that's making this very charming and sweet VR game called Moss. and his agent calls the audio director and says, "What do you think about Jason for this?" And on his name alone, they go, "Oh, it's not that kind of score." And it was like, what, a Graves score? Like it was, and he ended up doing it, and it became, like that's recently his signature is this incredibly melodic and charming and beautiful. He did the sequel as well, and it was just, yeah, it was one of those funny things where it's a source of work, but it can definitely be incredibly.
It can also flip the other way, where if someone there's a job comes up and they're like, oh, fantastic, like I mean, I'm sure you, Steph, might have this with like the Assassin's Creed score. They were like, oh, well, we want that, but well, we don't want you to just copy that, so we'll get someone else to do it. And you're sort of like, well, and I had a hilarious commercial number of years ago, which was Tempt with music that I'd done, and I got rejected at like the first round, and well, eventually I heard that they had something completely different. I'm like, well, okay, well, you said please do something like that, and I was like, oh, okay, and then they were like, we don't want that. And you're like, okay, great. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned before that before I started working in games, I was doing a lot of horror films. And I intentionally pigeonholed myself on that. I mean, it was what I wanted to do. And once I got into doing that a lot, I was kind of getting, I wouldn't almost say bored, but a little less inspired because I had been doing the same thing for so long. And when that first game came along, the question was, by the way, the first game was an Indiana Jones video game, which was like far from anything I'd ever written before. I'd never written music in that style. And, the director asked me, like, hey, do you think you could do this? And by the way, the answer is always yes. If you're a composer, I mean, you just say yes and then you figure it out, which is exactly what I did. And then, now I think if you were to ask anyone now what they know of my work, they'd probably say it's like kind of more in that vein than the horror vein. So, but the point sort of being is I think being pigeonholed is not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of like what you're saying, Austin. I mean, I think that it does generate, a lot of work, if you can sort of establish a sound for yourself. But also, as a composer, it's just being open-minded and being willing to try new things, because I think you never know really where that road will take you. So, I mean.
Shall I speak now? Yes. It's a really tough question because it's that the whole pigeonholing thing, it really just does feel totally out of your control a lot of the time. I feel very, very fortunate in that I have gotten offered to do a lot of very different kinds of projects. So I don't feel like I've done the same kind of score more than once. And that's like a gift. And I think I chalk that up to very fortunately being hired by people who wanted to take a risk in hiring me, because I don't really have that many credits to myself. I've written additional music for Harry Gregson Williams for many years, so Stephen as well. And that was kind of where I got my start. And then when I went out on my own, I was like starting to build something by myself. And it started with someone just taking a chance and being like, yeah, let's go for it. And then from there, every subsequent thing was that. It's like they wanted to meet somebody who they hadn't worked with before, somebody who was a different voice, right? That's what happened with Assassin's Creed. They're like, we have these DLCs. And Ubisoft was like, this is an opportunity, at least this is what it seemed like. This is an opportunity to work with somebody we don't know. And DLC is a little bit, lower stakes, right? Less music. So it's a chance to invite somebody else in, and then you sink or swim from there, really. But when you're like where you are in your career, like for me, I had a lot to prove, and I was luckily just finding collaborators who were willing to take that chance on me, and that's been I feel very, very lucky to have had that path so far. So that's not really about the pigeonholing necessarily, but that's just what I have to say about that.
Pigeonholing. Oh God, what do I have to add to this? I like putting myself into uncomfortable creative situations. I think, and if I can bluff my way into a project where I can do that, and they take me on board, then you just go along for the ride. I did a guitar band-based score for a project for a series show last year, and I don't know how I got the project, but I talked myself into it, and then I almost sort of like had to backstep and think, what have I just done, but I'm very much, I love, you just embrace it. And so that's now added to my arsenal of styles that I can take on board for future projects.
Different kinds of projects from there. It's like building those little.
Absolutely. So I think, I mean, and also doing too much of when I started out, I just said yes to everything. And you do, to build up your credits. And then as you become being known for a certain specific style, you go, no, I think I'm going to push. I think it's knowing when to say yes and when to say no, and not saying yes to everything. I did a couple of films about mountaineering a couple of years ago, and I got offered another couple of movies in that world, and I had to politely decline. And the same for, and also being a brown girl, I get offered a lot of projects with South Asian bend to them, and I want to take on those projects if I feel that I can do something, offer something special and unique and different, and with a spin and a twist to it. So yeah, I just think so pigeonholing, it's very, very difficult as a creative to navigate that space, isn't it, and to try and work out of the box.
That's actually a really interesting perspective too. Like for example, when I was first starting out, I had lots of friends that were composers, men, women, from all cultures, and I noticed that a lot of the women were getting offered these opportunities to score things that were sort of pretty and melodic, and all of the guys were getting these big, epic, action movies, and it's like before we even had a chance to write a note, we were pigeonholed, just based on who we are, our physical appearance. And I'm actually really interested to hear that perspective and what you've experienced in that regard too.
I did a film about 2 Formula One racing drivers last year, and it was like, yes,
that's awesome, by the way.
Or
really
and
cool.
I once had a director say, "Can you write action music?" And I thought, why wouldn't I be able to? It's emotion,
I'm always fascinated by what exactly they don't think. Like, do they think we're going to hit the keyboard less hard or something, or do they think we're going to hit the keyboard too hard?
Yeah,
and it's just it is a mind-numbingly dumb thing that it's the. And I think this has been a really nice place where games has sort of started out, where, and it's not something, it's not by any means perfect, and across the industry wide, we still have a great deal of work to do. But I think there is a really nice thing where it's like that by virtue of who gamers are and the fact it's a global industry, it's like you really can't sort of be in that space anymore. And so there was a definite place where in film, the fact that that it took till was it 93 when Rachel Portman got an Oscar nomination. The fact that you had an industry that for 60 years, that's insane. It's almost worse than there are lots of other industries out there that have better records than that. But gaming is such a young sphere. Really, the first game score was only in like 93, 94 with a live orchestra. And so we're getting to this really nice place where I think it's you're seeing people doing really interesting things, and actually like the ones where you see like a choice way out of left field, even if it be it culturally, be it and be whatever. It's that's I'm seeing really awesome scores coming out of places where you wouldn't expect, or composers doing things where they get known for being like sort of doing something that's very sort of melodic and light, and then coming in and one of my absolute favorites was with Dario Marianelli a number of years ago. Was always known as he's a very cultured composer, very classy, and his writing is incredible. It's very sort of classically orientated. And then V for Vendetta came out, and my God, those drums smashed the theater. They sounded so good. And I was like, he out-Hansed Hans. Literally massive drums in the theater. Taiko's beating the shit out of it. It was great. And you're just like, that's, I think with all of us, I think that's really what we're striving to, is just be able to give it a go. And and ultimately often ignorance, particularly for me, like if there's a style that I don't know anything about, it's fun to try it out and make mistakes, and the mistakes can sometimes be what makes it interesting. So
What are those creative differences between composing for film or television and games, and how that plays out?
We'll start the other end.
We can start at the other end.
We could just
Go
hop
for it.
in,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What are the creative differences? Lots, and then not lots in other ways. For me, I probably, because I came from the film and TV world, and I also started in concert music as well when I was younger. I don't. I haven't approached starting a game score any differently than I would a film and television score. And I spoke about this yesterday at the talk as well. So apologies if I'm repeating myself. I always want to like make a choice about, okay, am I going to try and establish a character theme? Am I going to try to establish a game, like a story theme? There's a particular stylistic influence that I want to explore. And I'm like a big researcher. So like, I like to listen to a lot of different kinds of music. I like to just like gather influences and kind of figure out the best vessel to like through which I can tell the story. And that includes like usually building like a unique template for every single project that I have. So like finding specific sounds, something that's inspiring for me that I know is something like, oh, okay, I wanna work with this and see what I can harness there. And it's figuring out if I want it to be, you know, a thematic story and sitting down at the piano or like picking up an instrument, because depending on whatever I'm using, I'm going to come up with a different type of theme, you know? So that is creatively aligned from film and TV to games for me. The actual art of the composing is very different, like in the sense that you really have to like be clever about how you're designing the music in games, because it's non-linear and there are very different, you know, technical requirements that go into writing music like that. Sometimes it has to be multi-layered, you know, it has to, you know, a boss fight, like it needs to be like at a 10 intensity the whole time so that they have like the ability to arrange it in certain ways. I mean, this is a very specific kind of piece of music that is, but you know, you have to think not so much in like, okay, you know, this piece has to start here and end there, and it's going to have a journey in between, and that's what it is. It's concrete. So in game music, you have to really be aware of like, okay, if I do want to have this puzzle of a piece of music in the game that's reacting to the player, you know, it's like maybe you want to be able to like choose a tempo where you can go half time and then double time, and all of the layers are going to work together because you can pivot and like push the pace and like when you're adding intensity and stuff like that. So it's a very different, like it stretches a totally different part of the brain, in my opinion, in my small experience in games.
I mean, I think that the overarching creative approach is, for me at least, the same, whether it's a film, a concert piece, a video game, you know, because music is music. I mean, you know, you're really trying to connect with an audience. You're trying to like enhance a narrative. You're trying to, you know, evoke emotion. And I think that is the same across all you know, sort of platforms. But I mean, I think that there are certain technical differences for sure. And then I think that creatively, how you approach creatively those technical differences is really important. Like you're saying with games, it's like trying to think of creative ways to make the music more interactive, you know, that kind of thing, which I think is one really cool aspect of games. It's like one of the things I've sort of embraced, and you know, that challenge I think is a lot of fun. But for me, I mean, I think I always approach it, you know, sort of the same, whether it's, you know, film, TV, games, or, you know, just music I'm writing for myself, which is, you know, just human expression. You know, it's just art at the end of the day.
I don't have much to add here. I just think that the technical, it's easy, I think, to consign the differences between film and TV to the technical side. And I don't really disagree with anything that I'm hearing, but in my mind, the technical differences are creative, because I just don't think the same way when I know this is a piece that's going to play back in anything other than just hit play and it goes till it's over. If it's anything other than what Spotify can do, I just don't think my approach, even from the first fraction of a second of thinking about it, is going to be the same. And so for me, the sort of interactive medium just brings on a whole other. It's not a twist on the linear format. It's like another format. And so, yeah, for me, the creative difference is seminal. It's not. It's creative. It is creatively different because it's technically different. It's not like a skin graft one on the other. if that makes
I have,
any sense.
so I have a question for you there, which is that, so I've seen some of the graphs, and by the way, if you haven't seen them, you should look them up. They're like for Stray Gods. I'm like, wow. I thought I understood roughly about how like game scores are put together. And I looked at this graph and was like, huh, I don't even wait.
They're bullshit. It's basically it's a beautiful mind, It's just.
But I wonder to the degree to which everybody, to which you write into, because sometimes with music implementation, you get a very sort of set structure where they say, well, we need we need a 1 minute combat cue that we're going to loop. Or you get a sort of very vague structure, but I wonder the degree to which you sort of write into the box and whether that changes your musical thinking. Because I sometimes find that, one of the big things that I dislike in film is when the music is, the music is conscious of where the next cut is, because we as the audience have not seen the film, but because we, as composers, we tend to put a marker at A and a marker at B, and we go, I'm going to go from there to there, and sometimes there's a big gap in the middle. You have to figure out how to write the gap. Well, I do this with myself all the time, and I every time I do it, I swear I'm never going to do it again. But you don't have an idea for this bit, so you skip a bit, and then you have to plug a gap, usually from god-awful key change in 6 bars. I have to go from F sharp to whatever. But I wondered to the degree to which, how much do you think that influences, are you influenced by the implementation? And do you write into the implementation, or do you, how do you balance that out? Because that, for me, is one of the big challenges, I think.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I think I've been doing it wrong, to be honest with you, because I end up making more work for myself. But I tend to not write into the parameters that are set. I tend to write music for the sake of music and then backtrack and try to figure out how, now that I've written this piece of music that I feel is musical and expresses that emotion I'm trying to get across, and how do I backtrack and find creative solutions to make it work for the technical aspect.
Yeah, I feel the same way about that too. I sort of just know how to approach what I feel like might be right, and then I go back and hone it and make it work for what the ask is. But following the instinct and just being I'm on this train, and we'll this feels right, and then you tailor it and you sort of curate and self-edit and do all of those things from there. I wonder if writing the thing that you're supposed to write, obviously it's that's, you're still doing it, but I wonder if it's so limiting right out of the gate to be this is what I'm writing for the implementation. But if you look at it just more so as a piece of music, which I think is what I feel my mindset, strangely enough, is more like that in games than in film and TV, which is just a hindrance for me, I guess, creatively, but that I think has helped me having been in games. It's just look at it as a piece of music and don't get so caught up in the minutia of what's happening, even though the art of scoring itself is so crucial and it's most of what we need to be concerned with. It's nice to just step into a piece of music and say yeah, this is I'm following this and the shape of it, and this is what I'm concerned about the musicality of it, and then going back and doing that, which I think we all do in film and TV when we write a cue too. That's really no different for most of us. But
yeah, I mean, it's hard enough as it is to be creative and do the thing we do without there already being a straitjacket put onto it. So I mean, I think that we have a similar approach then, because I try to forget about all those parameters in the beginning stage, at least, and just do what comes naturally to me, and then then start applying the straitjacket, I guess, after the fact.
That's one thing that's interesting with all this, is that the one thing with linear storytelling, with film or TV, is that you have, as a composer, you can have the holistic overview of the experiential journey, emotional journey that you want to take your audience on. You want to map the arc of the music across the whole hour or 2 hours that you're scoring, and you can never do that with games. And so what do you do with games music? You dive into, as you're saying, you're looking at the creative flow of each unique individual piece of music that you're writing for the game, and obviously, but you can never get that overview because you're not the gamer, and it's changing every time.
I think we also have a bit of a issue where, I mean, it's not unique to games. I mean, TV has it. If someone says you have to write a main title, we all have a preconception of what a main title theme should be. Rolls with credits, blah blah blah. There's a sequence, and it'll be 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever. It's a statement. You're trying to make a statement of a theme, and they usually be like, we want that, or a number of times they come and say, well, we want a Game of Thrones, or we want one of those, or we want one of this. But the problem in games is very different. Where we usually have people come and say, and one of the worst experiences. Well, not worst. It was a great experience, but the hardest experiences I've had was like working on the first Titanfall game. I ended up with a spreadsheet, and mercifully, this is something I think that's ending a lot. Is where you get a spreadsheet, and there's 10. I had to write 10 medium Titan action cues, and by the time you got to medium action cue number 7, I'm like, oh my god, I have no idea what to do here, because there's only so many things, and so we often have this sort of pigeonholing of cues where they say, right, you need to write a boss battle, and you're like, well, okay, well that's already got a pretty loaded conception of it's got to go well with the meme of here's the boss music, so that's or explore music or these kind of things. And I think one of the nice developments in games now is we're starting to sort of see moving away from that, and people saying, actually, well, let's not call it that from the outset, because we're really just painting ourselves into a corner, and just write music and then sort of figure it out. And the fact that you can have like combat in a video game without needing to have music that's bang 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 bang, but you can do something more interesting than that. So I think it's a cool place.
I was blown away by Gordy saying that sometimes you still just write music for yourself. I forget that sometimes you do that. You're just writing it.
Who's doing that?
Does anyone else
I write for myself, and then I try to figure out how to make it work for everyone else.
Well, does anybody else ever just do that just for fun? You're still with your crazy schedules. I cannot imagine.
I'm going to say one of my favorite pieces of last year, and I need to write this awesome piece which you haven't heard it, which uses the sounds of Sputnik in a really interesting way, called "My Mind Is Still" on the WSA album. If you haven't heard it, it's brilliant. So yeah. Anyway, I know you do.
You do.
It was a one-off, yeah. No, it was both Stephen and I. We worked on this beautiful project, commissioned to write the music for this fantastic vocal ensemble in the UK, and that was one of the biggest challenges I've ever had, actually, because I wasn't given we had a one-word brief, infinity, and we could interpret that in any way we wanted. So, and I'm so used to being given a framework and restrictions and parameters to score to, whether it's games or film or TV. Give me a story to compose to. And so I think I'm working on a project at the moment, which is not film or television at all, and it's not video games. And it's and so I've had to create my own narrative. And that is one of the biggest, for me, coming from storytelling, it's the biggest creative challenge I've ever had in my career. What do I do?
I mean, in a sense, composers, we're kind of interior decorators, really. We're given an architecture and told, to what you could do with it. And the best experiences now are the ones where you're actually working with the architect and they haven't already built the building. And I think that's sometimes where, I think what film and TV are learning from video games is that actually, if you, for example, if you edit to music, if you actually get your composer on early enough, for any producers out there, like you should be doing this, get your composer early enough and write stuff, and then you're going to get away from this sort of very sort of traditional sense of scoring, because scoring can either be a wonderful thing. There's amazing scores written. You pull up pen and paper scores of Williams and Goldsmith and people where every cut is marked in the thing, and the old streamers and punches and marked out. But I think because of the nature of the DAW and what we have, and we have this instant gratification where you can just play it in and be like, play the film and be like, oh, directed, you like it. But you get to this ridiculous place that we ended up in where you sit a director down and expect them hear the music and in the minute after that come up with a lucid sort of interpretation of notes. Whereas actually what you're asking them to say, like, well, we like that piece, but I'd like you to do this and that and that, and that's fine. But a much more interesting way is to live with music for a while. And the notion that you could have, write a tune and be like, well, actually, we come up with a better tune for this, or like that to me is really interesting, and that's.
Yeah, and honestly, in games has a unique sort of position on this, in the fact that we have very long schedules typically, and we have this luxury of being able to write something and then revisit it in 6 months. It's not like a film or some films where you have a 6-week schedule to write the entire score. Stephen and I have worked together quite a bit, and we write ideas, and then a year later go back to them and say, oh, this isn't really working for this thing anymore because it's changed so much. Let's see if we can find a new home for it, or let's see if we can adapt it to make it work for something else, or but that's a luxury, honestly, in games. You know.
I mean, that's not to say that also the gun of a deadline pointed at your head
Oh,
can't become
I mean, it
a
was 100%
remarkable
necessary.
creative, yes.
Yeah, it's
Like,
needed.
I was actually just recently done a demo for a company where I was like working on this thing, and like they said, oh, we only need 3 months, and I spent the first 2 months going, I have no idea what to do,
That's
and then literally
typical.
left. It's like I did that with my homework when I was a kid. I was like,
It's part of the
you leave it to the last
process,
2 minutes.
you know?
It's
If you don't do that, maybe you won't get the good stuff at the end.
Exactly. Yeah,
I know
mean,
my
think
stuff in
that's
the
all
beginning is
creative people.
absolute trash. If I wrote a lot in the beginning, I'd be like, oh, no, this has to go eventually.
I think it bespeaks a kind of Stockholm syndrome about our love of this industry, that the question was, what music do you write for yourself? And everybody immediately shifted into deadlines and I want the brief and I love that. It's just like, good question. We're going to talk about something else now. But I feel that deeply. There's something that you said, Stephen, that it remind me of film and TV kind of learning about the potential value in the sovereignty of the composer and being able to kind of marinate on an idea inspired by the
I
material.
like marinade. That's very good.
I like interior decorator. I'm so using that from now on.
It's either cooking or interior decoration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The story, like a very famous story of this kind of thing, where I'm a believer. I love like those conductor scores, the short scores rather, that are the streamers and punches, handwritten, where you see, Goldsmith is noting camera cuts here, and you look at all the music editor timing notes, and this is film composing is as deeply as one can imagine it. And I so admire that. I'm not crazy about kind of just writing a thing completely independently and then editing it to picture if the alternative is possible. Sometimes it's not possible, and that obviously I'm sympathetic to that. But I do love that art, the unique art of film scoring or game scoring, where you are writing to the implementation or you are writing to the footage. I am very attracted to that because it's very unique. It's very different from sitting down to write a symphony or an opera or make an album with your band or whatever the case may be. But as a argument against all of that, one of the most famous themes in the whole of cinema history was written precisely because the composer didn't know anything about the film, which is Eric Korngold's King's Row, where he wrote one of the most famous anthems in the history of the golden era of Hollywood, because he assumed a movie called King's Row was going to be this kind of Arthurian legend, big knights, and it was like a melodrama about people in a gated community or whatever. And so he writes this theme, and it ends up being weirdly this amazing juxtaposition of the kind of grandiosity and pompousness of this theme to a, kind of wealthy elite story. But if he had known more about the movie, he actually wouldn't have written that. And there's like an interesting lesson in the less you know, sort of backwards moving rainbow star in the sky. And so, yeah, I am clearly offering nothing resembling a coherent conclusion, more just in progress thoughts on the subject.
I think we have time for a couple audience questions. Second row.
Thank you all for this talk. It's fascinating. I just wanted to ask on the topic of interactivity, because you briefly touched on that. A lot of what a composer does in one way is to kind of curate precisely the experience of the audience, be that in film or video games. Do you use interactivity in a way to take that control off of you and give it more to the player in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the end goal, is to give the control to the end user, but to sort of, I guess, see all possibilities in advance so that you can, sort of know the end result will be a good result, when the end user, plays the game and tries different paths, but yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate goal for me, at least, is for them to choose.
It's a really big question, actually. It's a really interesting question. And I think it's also what's really funny about interactive music, certainly interactive music where you can change, for example, on a vertical level, vertical reorchestration level, that I think you're at. It's this really interesting place where I'm not sure I've yet heard what I would consider the greatest version of that. I've heard lots of good. Actually, Jason is probably with the aleatoric, the fear engine, or whatever they call it, and that's probably almost one of the best examples of something where it really sort of used it and it lent into the nature of aleatoric music very nicely and played, and it was really, really cool. And I think everyone saw that there's an interesting there, but the interesting thing there, but the difficulty you have fundamentally with many styles of music is that, particularly in the usual way we think of stems, we think of strings, brass, wood, guitars, whatever, what have you. There are very few pieces in music in the world where you can just mute something and be like, yep, it's now still cohesive, and that's a massive challenge. And you sort of always get, and it's technical challenge as well from mixing standpoints and with lots of other elements, with like how you're getting things to balance with the game. But and it's also this other thing of like that I think one of the things we discovered is that you don't want music in a game to necessarily feel like it's commentating too much, because if you're playing and you do something and every time you press a button the music does something, you're like, oh, shut up, it's like a bad football commentator. But then you get these moments where there's moments where you get music surges interactively. There's great moments. It's semi-linear, but it's in Medal of Honor and in Michael Giacchino. There's a couple of moments where the music surges in that game, and you're just like, hell yes. There's you're running over the breeze. There's or there's the first Call of Duty. There's a moment where you go. I think you go over the top in one sequence of like this thing. Or like there's the Stalingrad level. I think it is in I think it's in 2. And it's just amazing. And you're like this. And so we're getting glimpses, but I just don't think any of us are actually experts yet. I don't think anybody is. And I'm fascinated to see in the next 20 years where that bar goes, because there's clearly awesome things there, but like I just don't know that we've necessarily fully discovered it yet. So that's it's a young industry, and at that point,
and I never dismiss the possibility of just complete serendipity. I mean, particularly with writing action cues, it's like, oh, you put it in, and it looks like, wow, I hit everything, but in reality, I didn't plan to hit any of it.
We project meaning. We assume agency. It's one of the dark secrets of interactive music. Is there have been times where things were actually less interactive than you would think, because if there's just enough shit happening,
it's hitting something,
and it's interesting, and I turned and the trumpet went up a fifth. It's like, holy shit! How'd you know I was gonna do that? But instead, a different player turns 5 bars later when the strings trilled, and holy shit! How'd you know I was? You have to learn. You use both. Sometimes it's okay. I do want when the player turns to hit it with the trumpet going up a fifth, but the rest of the time I'm happy to let it be chance. That kind of. The way I will add the one thing that I always think of it to answer your question about kind of manipulating the audience. My fantasy version of this, which is honestly not applicable to most projects because most have pretty defined, you're playing a game that says go here and do this, and if you don't do that, the game will either fail you or you'll be in limbo for eternity. So it's not like we speak about games often as if all of them are this matrix of infinite possibilities, which in reality, even Minecraft isn't that, and that's probably about the closest you can get. But that's lofty language aside, my kind of northern star that I use conceptually when writing is that I don't think of what I'm doing as telling the player how to feel, but hopefully giving them a toolkit that they can kind of embrace or not and be sort of absorbed to their own discretion, and so that they're doing half or more than half of the work emotionally. I can't make them do anything, but if I give them tools to kind of amplify that emotion, then hopefully that's what makes it actually a good experience.
Thank you.
Now you have to throw that at whoever wants to do it next.
I love this green box.
I
by the
know.
way. I want one.
Yeah, for real.
Nobody else wants a green box. Oh, everybody wants a green box.
Oh, it does throw. Okay, this is even better.
It says it right on the thing.
Very worried up there for a
This is
Yeah.
brilliant.
It's like the sharing pillow, except there's a mic inside.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about each of your compositional processes. Stephanie talked about yesterday using an instrument that you don't necessarily know, so that you're not constrained by habitual patterns and things like that. I was wondering if you all talk about that initial phase when you're sitting in front of a white page. How do you all go about coming up with ideas? What are your personal rituals?
In addition to what I said yesterday, I also drink heavily.
Coffee, I assume.
Time-honored tradition among composers.
Yeah, I have a cat who's my studio assistant, sleeps and sits next to me all day, and he's bald because I stroke him so much.
So drink, get a
so
cat.
stressed. Get a cat. Very much like Stephanie, actually. I love the research process. That's my way of diving in and avoiding the blank page syndrome. I research and try and find some angle, some approach to latch onto, to capture the underbelly of and the true heart of whatever project, story I'm trying to tell. and then researching musicians. One of my mantras is I love to make the invisible visible. I find specialist musicians who are not session players and throw them in front of bring them into the studio and see what comes out. Sometimes I do semi-improvised sessions, or if it's a scripted show, come up with themes and have a thematic approach, or just come up with a unique sound palette. A lot of the writing process for me happens when I'm not actually in the studio. I can be food shopping or in the shower, and I keep my phone with me, and I will sing into it all the time. And if I'll go to bed and I wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning, and I've got a eureka, I've come up with something, and I'll wake up the next morning and think, and listen back to it and think, if I remember what I thought of at that moment, and then it's maybe an idea that's worth pursuing. Otherwise, I'll just bin it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the blank page is probably the most intimidating thing ever to a composer. And I mean, I have many methods. I can honestly say that I've never actually written a good piece of music where I started writing that piece of music in my studio, like sitting at the piano with a blank page. I mean, I get a lot of ideas when I'm away from the studio. I get probably 70% of my ideas when I'm in the shower. I have like a wax pencil.
Much shower talk this week.
I'm not
it's
kidding.
so true.
It is true. I think I actually analyzed this.
Are you drinking
maybe it's
in the
the
shower?
white noise or something like that.
That's
I
a
can hear
personal
things from the
question.
white noise. But I mean, I have a wax pencil and I write on the wall in my shower, and then I take pictures of it later and go transcribe what I was doing. I mean, I get ideas when I'm playing tennis for some reason, so I'll sing it in my
you,
phone.
I think.
Yeah, these are deep industry secrets.
But they really are. And I mean, and I think honestly, like I feel if I have just a few notes as a starting point, I can write an hour of music based on it. But that blank page is impossible. So one of my little tricks is I have like a 12-sided die with all the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, and I have like a handful of them, and I'll just roll that. And this is an exercise. I do this literally every day. I do this. This is how I start my day. Is I will roll these dice, look at the 6 or 5 notes or whatever I've chosen, and say, how many ways can I voice these 5 notes into a cool chord? Now can I voice it and make it darker? Can I voice it and make it brighter? Can I write a melody out of it? And it's like a little exercise I do that just kind of gets my brain thinking about music. And then suddenly, and a lot of times even I come up with some good musical ideas out of just this exercise. I'm like, oh, I can take that and turn that into a melody. So it's just, you just have to find weird tricks to get past that intimidating blank page, I guess.
Well, so I'm in my shower. I have my cat. I don't own a cat. I have a bottle of gin. I'm trying to add something. It's like that game. We all have to add a fourth thing. I don't know what I'm going to add. Like courgette or something. I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, let's just skip over that. We're not. There are cameras. Excellent. But no, I mean seriously. I think actually the biggest thing is getting past is the blank page, and I think for me is like it's like finding ways to just start, because generally speaking, once you get going, you're going, and that's something. So just hunting for some kind of just some kind of. And often I'll pull up things, like either depending on like having templates with sound loaded or just having an empty template, not having, because sometimes templates are really bad things, you're going to the same place. I'll often even look through sort of, like interesting sort of, like loops or stuff like that. So just something which I'll usually then get rid of at the end of the day and sort of throw out and sort of find something else. But just something that because I think otherwise it's that thing of like I think we're all procrastinators, every composer is, I think, to a degree. So yeah, just finding some way to just put something on the page or put something into the sequence. It doesn't matter, and being okay with the fact that it's probably going to suck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think when you sit down to start something, it's sort of like, okay, I begin now, and there's so much pressure to be like, oh, the first few notes, is that it? No, it's not. And if it is, cool. But for the most part, I think just like just trying to be patient with yourself and the process, like it's the worst part for me. It's like exhausting. to circle back 100 years later to Shalini's question, I love not writing music sometimes. It's awesome. And so I tend to not write music apart from maybe a gig that I'm working on. That's actually something that I've had to like face and understand, like, is there a reason for that? And I wonder if it's because like just the daunting nature of it and like what am I creating and all of that nebulousness that kind of comes with that. But I agree. I think just like sitting down and just being like, okay, just go, just like shut up and go,
Do something.
do it.
Do something.
You're gonna get there eventually. It's just like taking that step is the most annoying part because it just feels like everything has to be so meaningful. But I think when you just allow yourself to be like, just like go somewhere else in your head, just like do something, and then like you'll get to the core of it.
And if in doubt, buy a new sample library. So it's another brilliant
Yeah, it'll
way of
distract
starting
you,
to-
and then it's
'cause
also
you'll
like
sit there going, if
inspiring or
only
whatever.
I had that choir sample library, I could write
It'll
the
fix
score.
everything.
And
It'll fix my marriage.
It's
It'll
all
fix
nonsense.
my yeah. I'm broke. It'll fix everything.
I have nothing to add to this incredible menu of insights into Gordy's shower, and I also
You have
use
a cat?
Gordy's shower as. I like that wax pencil idea. The only thing I would add, actually, I really like when you said putting down a loop. It made me think. I've never realized kind of what I was doing before, but there've been times where I did that. I would put something down that's sort of intentionally generic, and then I would layer on top of it, and then I'd get rid of it, and then I'd layer on top of that thing, and it's kind of like you're playing a game of telephone with yourself, where it's kind of like your dice, where something's being handed to you, and you react to it, and then you kind of create multiple ripples of reaction, and once you're sort of in the great grandchildren of the initial randomness, you've actually gone somewhere, and it's sort of a low friction way to do that. It's an interesting thought, but
It forces you to a tempo as well. That's the other thing. Is like, especially if you're in a sequencer, like if you don't have a BPM, it's like, oh, what speed should this be at? You know, a number of times I've stared at the tempo editor, going, well, on a blank sequence, going, oh shit, what should this
Yeah,
be?
it's-
Fast, slow.
the only thing that I would
110.
add is that it's been kind of peripherally referenced, I think, especially when you were talking about templates. But I tend to sort of take off most easily when I put immense restriction on what I'm doing. So like Abzu, for example, was one where at the beginning I said, what would this sound like if the only thing in this score was one oboe and 7 harps? And I wrote for like a year with that as the thing. And then it was sort of only eventually did I kind of cave and say, okay, I'll add some strings in some of these places and things like that. But it was what will you do when you just take all of your normal crutches off the table? I tend to do that every time. I tend to just say, what's the sort of the least that I can do here? Not because I'm trying to work less. It's actually so much more work than just throwing the kitchen sink at something and realizing, oh, well, everybody knows that, a big, giant, booming low brass section is going to achieve this, and that's why we use it time and again. But I wonder if this time there's a way to do that not that way, but achieve the thing that normally is trying to achieve, et cetera. So for me, yeah, that's why I liked your template. I very habitually do not have a template. The only template that I have is if I know I'm going to be using a semi-traditional orchestra. I've already like worked out all the bussing and shit for my samples on that. But generally, I open that and I immediately delete every channel and go, okay, this one is going to be, like I was that Thailand thing. I said, how about in addition to all the Thai instruments, it's going to be 4 tubas. That's my orchestra. And, off we go. So that, for me, it helps, actually. I find it, because you start thinking of the full potential. Like last night, before the concert, when the rehearsal, I was watching the tuba player warm up, and he was going, and I was like, when's the last time someone actually wrote for a tuba like that? It's fucking awesome. Like, I want to do that now,
Yeah.
Percussionists, yeah. Every time you go to percussionist part, you're like they sit there improvising it with the 10 minutes before the session. You're like, oh shit, that's a really good part.
I'm
I can't
so
write.
underutilizing it. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think you can boil every single answer down to one thing: is that starting with nothing and creating something is really difficult. So picking a very minimal parameter of any form. So you're saying pick a tempo, pick an instrumentation. I'm saying pick pitches. Then you're starting with something, and then you can start to be creative and work with that. And oftentimes you then go back and just completely remove that parameter, throw it away.
Yeah.
I mean, something Austin said, and this was actually an exercise that one of my teachers in college taught me, and I still use it, and I think it's a good exercise for any composer, is to take a piece of music you like and just say it's just, as a simple example, a melody and harmony, melody and chords. Just take the chords out, take the melody only, reharmonize it. Now take that melody, throw it away, and write a new melody to your chords. Now take those chords, throw them away, and write a new harmonization. And suddenly it's that telephone game where you're starting, suddenly it's as far away as possible from the original source material, but you found a creative way to use that original source material as sort of your starting minimal parameter.
Yeah, that's I love that. I love the idea of creating something that you're creating a context for it and then just removing the context and like what else can that become from there. And yeah, I think imposing boundaries on yourself is really amazing. I get very daunted by the abyss and like the infinity, like that. I was sweating hearing about that. I was like, oh God, what do you do? And boundaries come in all different shapes and sizes too. Your boundary could be the budget. I mean, you know, it could be a lot of different things and all of these other wonderful things that people set up here too. But I do find that when you like create those confines for yourself, that you will make the music the best it can be with that, you know, and you tend to even get deeper with it because you're setting those boundaries for yourself creatively. So I certainly like to do that. And usually the timeline and waiting until the last minute helps that as well. Yeah.
So everyone, when you hire these composers, give them fake deadlines.
That absolutely is a thing that happens. That is.
And then you play the bullshit
Every
deadline
single
game,
project.
which is like we try and figure out whether the deadline is a real deadline or if it's a bullshit deadline.
No, pencils down Thursday with Friday
not
morning.
Thursday,
Hey,
it's gonna-
by the way, we have another month.
Or the good one is if it's a Friday evening, you know that's a bullshit deadline
Yeah,
because
oh,
there's
yeah.
no way they're going to be putting it in on Saturday morning. So so you got till Monday. No, anyway.
And I was just told we ran out of our time for today. So thank you so much, everyone. This was wonderful.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Katie, for joining us.
Hugely honored to be here. I'm thinking about it every single day, just absolutely blown away. But I'm so happy to be here.
And I didn't expect to have everyone up, and I'm going to be very selfish and see if everyone will stay. Curious, who has been mentored on this panel?
Mentored, past tense. Well, like by someone.
Yes, by someone.
Yeah.
And how did you go about finding that? Did they find you? Did you find them?
Stephen and I had this conversation yesterday where
yeah,
we're like,
so
we have the same
we
mentor.
share a mentor.
We do. So Harry Gregson Williams is the composer that both of us have worked for many years in the past. I did not like seek out Harry and find his address and show up, but he, you know, an opportunity presented itself where he was like rebuilding his team at that time and he needed some extra help like part-time. And so I met him when I was getting my master's degree at UCLA. He heard some of my music and he was just kind of like what I was talking about before. He just gave me a shot and it was really my thing to mess up, you know, and eventually like I went part-time and was there for a while. So, and not every employer or boss is going to be a mentor, but Harry certainly was a mentor to me. And I was grateful for, you know, he took me under his wing, I think also, especially because he understood the lack of opportunity for women in the industry. And he knew how crucial of a role someone like him in the industry with that amount of power and experience, like, you know, opening the door for them. I think he saw that, and having that self-awareness and that intention, I thought was the best thing to have in a mentor. And the visibility that he offered me over the course of the time that I was with him is just, you know, I cannot speak more about how like I feel like that he set me up totally for success with the amount of you know, that he connected me with his collaborators and, you know, throwing me up on the podium to conduct sessions so that I could have the experience with like meeting the musicians.
His favorite thing to do.
He loves it.
He was like,
He won't-
you go out there with
he won't tell
an
you
orchestra and you'll just,
which,
you know,
you know.
go for it. That's
Yeah.
what happens. And you're like,
He's like,
standing
yeah,
there going,
you do the next one. It's like, okay. Didn't even know I was conducting today. Cool. He loves to do that. And I think that has made me such a much better musician. So just putting me in a place where I would be able to develop those industry connections, or at least be visible to these people who eventually would have the power to hire me on something. I was very fortunate to have worked with somebody who was able to give that to me.
Yeah, I came to, Harry and I met a mutual friend in London, introduced us, and it was, I forget, he was he was in the midst of a couple of movies, and one had a whole ton of rewrites, and so he was like, oh, could you just come and help? And then, you know, it was one of those movies, I think, that they were convinced that you know, wasn't going to be a huge success, and then it was. But yeah, he's an incredible teacher. I mean, he's one of the most naturally gifted teachers I think I've ever seen anywhere in the world ever. He would absolutely kill me for saying that, probably. Well, no, he wouldn't. But he knows. But he's very I mean, he's a very humble person, someone who doesn't, you know, he doesn't want to seek it out. But he's just has an ability to communicate, and I think that communicate, you know, the nature of what, getting to the nub of what's good about a bit of music and what works, and you know, so and I think, as you know, absolutely, as Steph said, is definitely someone who has looked at the industry and said, well, there are some things that are right here, and there's some things that are very, very wrong, and things that need to change. But has sort of, you know, used his position to be able to do that. And yeah, he's a phenomenal person.
And Katie, can you tell us about your experience in this mentorship program?
Definitely. I knew that was going to come up. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Steph, when you said they took a chance on you. And I really feel like that's what happened with me. I feel like there was nothing extremely special about me. I mean, there's so many amazing composers in the world, many of whom which I studied with. And it was the fact that they took a chance on me. And I'm here now because of it, because they had trust that I would take every opportunity and every grain of wisdom that they had, and that I would soak it in. And that's what I've been trying to do. And it's been absolutely amazing getting to know these amazing people. They're fantastic composers. They are just really nice people. Gordy and Steven, we've been working bi-weekly, meeting. They've been hearing some of my music and giving me some advice. And it's been amazing. There's a lot to composition for film and video games that is not taught in classes. It's a lot of working with directors and knowing the technology. There's so many different aspects to composition that we don't even think about. We just think music. And that's definitely true. And there's a lot to learn in the music world. But there's so much to learn on just how to be a professional in the industry. So for that, I'm hugely grateful. Yeah.
Show of hands, who has been a mentor? Some of these non-committal.
It's outside of like a formal program.
Well,
like
outside of it, yeah. Just I'm curious what the experience is like being a mentor to someone.
Speaking only for myself, I try to basically leave my door open all the time, and particularly one of my philosophical pillars is when I first moved to LA about 20 years ago, there were a couple composers that were really gracious to me and made me feel like you've just moved to your new home. This isn't now the place you live. Those were where you are coming from. Now you are home. Because I didn't know a single person. I had no family in LA. I had no friends in LA. I moved there completely blank slate. I just knew I wanted to pursue this world. And Nathan Barr and Jim Dooley both just really, they didn't know me from anyone, but just treated me like I was an immediate equal. And I basically have been committed to that as a thing for the last 20 years, where I want people, particularly when they are first moving to LA and I somehow catch wind of it, to say, I want you to feel like you have moved home. And that this is a great group of people that are now part of your kind of extended family and community. And the truth is, I'm aware we're in Ghent. This is not an LA specific thing. I don't want it to sound like it's somehow geographic in nature. It's a community of artists and of musicians and composers, and it broadens even from there, you know, the game industry as a whole, that sort of thing. So to me, it feels funny to call that mentorship because it's, you know, like what you just described of playing your music for them and getting feedback and being a fly on. Well, that to me, that's very earnest mentorship. But I do think that fostering that sense of just because you're new shouldn't make you feel like an outsider. And that's what I really care about.
Yeah, I think that it absolutely is mentorship. I think it's defined in so many ways. I feel really passionately about mentorship, and I feel like we all, as an industry globally, have a responsibility to pass things down, to like create a safer and more diverse and like more well-rounded atmosphere and place for younger generations coming into it. I do feel very, very strongly about that. And we all have varying experience and have been in the industry, all of us, for different amounts of time. But I do feel like there is a sense of like we would like to change the things that we feel like that maybe harmed us in the industry, or like any sort of toxicity that was not beneficial to us. Like I feel very strongly that like we all need to collectively like take people under our wing and reshape that and redefine what this industry can look like, and just make it like a safer, better space for everybody else coming into it. So whether that is like sitting down and giving, like doing master classes with people individually or in a group, or if it's doing, Austin, like what you do, just including, making people part of the conversation and just, meeting and nurturing this atmosphere in the industry. I think that's really important.
I think, there's a really interesting thought that, that firstly, we've often had discussions about sort of composer unions over the years. I mean, it's a perennial discussion, comes up every now and then, and putting aside that very long and deep rabbit hole, we certainly as an industry can turn around and say that we want to demand certain things, and I think get them, of saying like we want to see, things being essentially, in every way equal. There no sort of that kind of sort of cultural pigeonholing before you even get to listening to someone's music, which, I mean, the idea that, you would be judged on something other than what you write is completely absurd, particularly in music, which does, it's not like this, someone's athletically predisposed to do X, or, has a particular mindset to do Y. There's where we've all got the sort of capabilities to do it no matter what. There's no difference. So, but I think for mentorship, it's one of those really interesting things where you're trying to really analyze your own process. There's no better way to kind of figure out whether what you're doing yourself is the best, the optimal way, the thing that's sort of, making your life easiest. I mean, even down to sort of workflow things of sort of saying, there's times where, like people have pointed out things that I'm doing my work for, well, like, I'm losing hours of my life that I could spend with my family and things like that. And so sort of just the ability to talk through the way you work and how you go about it sometimes makes you go, actually, that's a really dumb way of doing it. Why am I doing it like that? Or, and there's exchange of ideas and completely on the sort of the level playing field. The other thing that's really interesting for me is that game music, I think Berkeley's particular thing is actually, I think, really one of the few out there that's doing it. It's only a 40-year-old industry if we're generous, really, in terms of, there isn't this educational infrastructure, but yet we now have a however many $1 trillion industry that needs content and needs stuff, and unless we start putting in place that, we're sort of devaluing our own trade, really. We need that. We need people coming into creating new stuff, because there's so much being made. So for me, it's just a natural progression of just like it's something that was absolutely done for me. I owe my career to Harry, like no shadow of a doubt about it, and will always owe that to him. But he didn't do that to want to be owed something in any way. He just did it because it's the right thing to do. And this I think has been a hallmark of the industry for a lot. The music industry for centuries, really, of this sort of idea of passing on knowledge and passing, and what you can and can't. I mean, can a school course really put down all the nuances of how fast this industry is moving? Probably not. I mean, it would be good to sort of try and push these things through. For example, like we have live service gaming, which we didn't have 5 years ago. No one knew what live service gaming was, and now we have games where you're releasing content every 2 months. And how do you do that? And how is the equation working? We're all figuring it out as we go along. So just an open discussion, and some of the most interesting ideas. In fact, probably most of the most interesting ideas come from the new people coming in who say, like, that's a really dumb way of doing this. There's a much better way. And that's what I love hearing that. It's the greatest thing.
I just learned from Stephen that you should use the microphone instead of your water bottle. I personally believe that it's, as an artist, it's our obligation to mentor. I mean, if you believe in the art that the discipline of art that you practice, then it's your job, it's your duty to sort of pass that information on. Because, I mean, if you do believe in it, then you also believe in it existing in 200 years or 500 years or 1,000. And the obvious that evolution of it, I mean, it requires that we pass information on and adapt it and try new things based on, what we've learned. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a time in my life where I did not have a mentor, and there's never been a time in my career, at least, where I didn't have a mentor and I was also mentoring. The entire team that works for me, I'm sure they would all consider me their mentor in some way. And I probably learned just about as much from them as they do from me. I mean, we're constantly passing ideas back and forth between each other, and getting better. I mean, my music is now better because of people that I have working with me on a regular basis. And I don't think mentorship doesn't necessarily need to be this formal thing. I mean, I've never actually assisted a composer in a professional capacity. But I've had mentors through teachers at school, and university and so on, that the information I learned from them was like pinnacle. Is critical in my own development. So I see no other option than to pass that information on.
And Nenita, anything else to add about mentorship?
Well, I'm a very strong advocate of mentoring. I never had a mentor throughout my entire career. Coming from my career growing up in the UK, it wasn't something it was kind of the done thing. And I know that, it's something that's actually come through from the US. And now we're embracing it a lot more and having teams and assistants and so on. I've actually just co-spearheaded a mentorship initiative called the Jonas Gwangwa Initiative through the Oscars Academy in the States, over in the UK. So we're supporting, being diversity and inclusivity. So over the last 12 months, we set up a competition to find 2 Black British composers, and they've just been through their first year. And it's been an amazing experience for them and for me. And I was an official mentor to one of the composers. It's like a fast track 12-month period of having regular meetings, having her sitting in on spotting sessions, recording sessions, and opening their world up to, this is what our world is as a screen composer, whatever that means. And I've been giving people shorts to compose to, things that small, low-budget projects that I would have passed on myself, giving that to them and then supporting them through that process and say, this is how you communicate with a director and this is the process, and there are so many different ways of doing things. So there are a lot of initiatives that are growing up now in the UK and in the US. So I think that's really, really heartening. And we also, being selfish, we want to create a landscape of educated, savvy, young, emerging composers that will create a better future for us as we get older and experience. We want good practices to come into place. It's not just about the creative and the technical aspect of learning the craft, but also publishing and the business side and handling contracts and knowing, how not to be exploited. I mean, yes, we can surround ourselves by composer teams and agents and publishers and managers and all these amazing people that support a composer. But when you're an emerging composer, you don't have that experience. You don't have those people on your team. So how can, the only way they can, then want to be part of organizations that, the Ivors Academy in the UK, SCL in the States, the Alliance of Women Film Composers, all these amazing bodies that are there to form tribes. We form our own community, and a lot of these colleges are spewing out composers who are incredibly well versed in, I can compose music, I can do this, and then assistantship is one great way into the industry. But in the UK, we've never traditionally had that. So you're just out there going to film festivals, and so there are other ways. There's so many different paths into the industry. So I think mentorship, giving people the opportunity to just see from the inside what it's really like to be a fly on the wall. Of course, I never want people sitting there breathing down my wet night watching me compose music. That would be but all the other aspects of what we have to do as composers, I think it's just, and I love it. Because when I mentor, I gain so much out of it. I learn a lot about myself when I'm mentoring, and so it's just joyous to see that passing on of information. It's just my personal tips and tricks that I've learned through the years, and but I'm sure we all have our own way of doing things, but ultimately it filters through to there are so many commonalities through which we experience our processes and experience of working as part of teams and collaborating with filmmakers and games developers. So it's
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, I do love that point, and I think everyone who is mentored is getting this new perspective and gets to share their own perspective. Music will always be coming from a lens in which you live. And I remember we were working together. You gave me some of the art materials from Apex and was like, just go nuts. Here's the story behind the character and let's see what you come up with. And I didn't listen to Steven's music beforehand for that specific character. And it's really fascinating being able to see the same character with a different lens and still have the same feelings.
Yeah, just to give you a really good example, actually, of how you can sort of have something illuminated in a really interesting way. For a long time in Apex, we've had a rule that we don't have music in the matches because our traditional reasoning behind this was that, you're very based on audio cues. So if someone lands, they need to know where someone is who's going to shoot them in 2 minutes, basically. So it's essentially we're like the audio and the footsteps and everything like that. So we had music all the way through the menus, and the moment you hit the ground, the music is out, and then it picks up right at the end of the game, literally at the end of the match when you win or lose. And we've done this game for 4.5 years, and we've never broken that rule. And immediately Katie came, we met for coffee, and she's like, I want to show you something. I'm going to show you how this, you could actually have music in the game. And completely we rethought. And for the next season of Apex, we are actually going to break the rule and change that because of the way she brought in this idea and said, look, I think you could do it in this way. I understand, the difficulty you want to something, but I think there's a way to do it, and there's a way to do it where you really heighten the end of the match and you end of this thing, and that we can stay out of the way of sound, but it's going to be really interesting, and that's getting implemented. That's going into the game. So
and the fact, being heard as a mentee, it's huge, and being able to share those ideas and feel like they were being heard was the most amazing part. So I really appreciate everything.
Well, we are continuing the program for next year, and Katie's going to make an announcement in a second. For the next recipient. EA believes it's the obligation of every composer in our community to usher in the next great generation of talent. That's why, in partnership with Berklee School of Music, we're committed to changing the numbers for women composers. We're committed to a future where we no longer have to use the term female composer. And most of all, we're committed to helping great young composers launch their careers. Our next EA Day will be held April 8th at the Berklee School of Music. Right now, I want to have Katie make the announcement of the second recipient of the EA Berklee Charting Change Scholarship.
Yes, the second recipient is someone that I've known for a long time. Her music is truly incredible, and her passion for learning is unmatched. It's unbeatable. So without further ado, the second recipient of the EA Berklee Next Gen Scholarship is going to be Carol Gao.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for sharing about mentorship.
Thank you so much.